Most people grow up hearing a simple, tidy story about money. Once upon a time, humans relied on barter. A farmer had grain but needed shoes. A shoemaker had shoes but wanted meat. Exchange was slow, awkward, and inefficient. Eventually, someone came up with a clever solution. Money, coins appeared, trade became smoother, and civilization advanced. It's a comforting story. Logical, easy to accept, and largely false. Money didn't appear because barter was inconvenient. It appeared because power needed a tool, and once that tool existed, it never stopped shaping who controlled value, labor, and violence. Welcome to the financial timeline, where money, power, and history collide. And nothing is ever as simple as it seems. Before money, most human societies didn't rely on barter at all. Inside small communities, people didn't constantly negotiate trades. They lived on memory, obligation, and trust. You gave because you belonged. You received because you were known. Debts weren't written, they were remembered. Value wasn't abstract, it was social. And it worked surprisingly well, as long as societies stayed small. But scale changes everything. As populations expanded, villages became cities. Trades stretched beyond kin and neighbors. Strangers arrived with no shared history, no reputation, no memory. Trust no longer scaled. Obligation weakened, conflict increased, and rulers faced a problem barter could never solve. How do you feed an army that doesn't know you? How do you tax people you'll never meet again? How do you extract value from a population spread across vast distances? That's where money enters the story. Not as convenience, but as infrastructure. For value to move across space and time, it needed a body, something durable, portable, divisible. Something that could be counted without conversation and trusted without memory. Food spoiled. Animals wandered. Land stayed put. Labor vanished once it was spent. Metal solved the problem. Copper, bronze, silver, not chosen for beauty, but for behavior. They didn't rot. They could be melted and reshaped. They could be divided precisely, and they were scarce enough to matter, yet common enough to circulate. Metal didn't just store value, it made value mobile. But it wasn't merchants who turned metal into money. It was rulers. Early states in Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Eastern Mediterranean didn't need money to trade with one another. They needed money to command. Armies don't fight on promises. Soldiers don't march on goodwill. They require payment, standardized, recognizable, and enforceable. Metal made that possible. Once states demanded taxes payable in metal, everything changed. People who once lived largely outside markets were forced into them. Subsistence turned into obligation. Harvests became liabilities. To obtain metal, peasants had to sell goods, labor, or time. Markets didn't grow naturally. They were pulled into existence by taxation and authority. Money didn't liberate people from rulers. It made rulers far more efficient. This part of monetary history rarely appears in textbooks. Money wasn't neutral. It wasn't created to help equals trade smoothly. It was designed to measure, extract, and redeploy value at scale. And once value could be extracted, it could be stored. Once stored, it could be accumulated. Once accumulated, it could be converted into force. That's why early financial centers weren't marketplaces. They were temples and palaces. Priests and kings tracked grain, metal, and labor long before merchants traded freely. Accounting came before coinage. Ledgers came before markets. The system was built top-down, not bottom-up. Then came the next transformation. Metal alone was useful. Stamped metal was revolutionary. When states began minting coins, marking metal with official symbols, weights, and authority, they weren't just standardizing trade. They were standardizing trust itself. A coin sent a powerful message. You don't need to trust the person handing this to you. You only need to trust whoever stamped it. Authority replaced the relationship. In Lydia, Greek city-states, and later Rome, coins carried faces, gods, and symbols of power. They weren't merely economic tools. They were political statements. Every transaction reinforced who ruled. Every payment reminded people whose system they lived inside. And once rulers understood this, temptation followed. Control the money, and you control supply. Control purity. Control circulation. Early governments learned they could stretch resources by reducing metal content, shaving edges, or issuing more coins than reserves justified. Spending became easier. Consequences arrived later. Inflation wasn't discovered in modern times. It was born the moment money became adjustable. Prices rose. Trust weakened. Soldiers demanded higher pay. Markets adapted, and still, the system endured. Because once money existed, societies couldn't return to what came before. The tool was too useful, too powerful, too embedded. Here's the crucial realization. Money didn't evolve away from power. It evolved alongside it. The bronze coins of ancient empires are gone, but the logic they created never left. We still use standardized units. We still depend on authority to define value. We still accept abstraction instead of trust. The materials changed. The incentives did not. Once metal became money, societies crossed a point of no return. Money didn't just measure value. It reshaped behavior. When value could be stored, power no longer required constant coercion. It could accumulate quietly. Armies could be raised before wars began. Bureaucracies could grow in peacetime. Money made authority patient. And patience is power. This is why monetary systems often outlive rulers. Kings fall, empires collapse, borders shift. But money absorbs new symbols while preserving the same structure beneath. Coins once carried gods, 10 emperors then national emblems. The imagery changed. The message stayed the same. Value flows through authority. As economies expanded, metal money escaped its original role. What began as a way to pay soldiers and collect taxes became the backbone of trade, credit, and hierarchy. Wealth could accumulate across generations. Debt could be recorded and enforced. Inequality could persist long after its original cause vanished. This is where money stopped being a tool and became an environment. By the height of empires like Rome, money was everywhere. Trade networks spanned continents. Coins passed through countless hands, carrying no memory of who mined the metal, who was taxed to extract it, or who suffered when its value was altered. Abstraction worked. The system felt natural, invisible, inevitable. And when pressure mounted, rulers rarely questioned the system itself. They diluted value because they had to. Wars were expensive. Administrations demanded funding. Raising taxes risked revolt. So the future was quietly borrowed from a little less silver, a little more currency. Inflation crept in slowly. Trust eroded gradually. By the time the effects were felt, the decision-makers were long gone. Nothing signals stability quite like solving today's problems by borrowing from tomorrow. Sound familiar? Modern money no longer clinks in pockets, but it still carries the DNA of bronze and silver. Today's currencies aren't backed by metal, but by authority, obligation, and enforcement. Taxes are still due. Debts are still owed. Armies are still funded. Scarcity is still managed, not by nature, but by policy. The language has changed. Instead of debasement, we say liquidity. Instead of clipping coins, we say balance sheets. Instead of emperors, we say institutions. But the mechanism is the same. Money wasn't designed to be fair. It was designed to scale. Fairness has always been secondary, negotiated, contested, adjusted through pressure. The core design favors those who control issuance, rules, and enforcement. That isn't conspiracy, it's history. Understanding this reshapes how you see inflation, debt, and crises. These aren't glitches in a perfect system. They're features of a structure built to manage massive populations, obligations, and power imbalances. When stress rises, the system bends, sometimes quietly, sometimes violently, never randomly. That's why financial education rooted in history matters. Not to predict the next collapse, but to recognize the limits of the system you live inside. to understand incentives, to see who benefits from stability and who absorbs volatility. Real financial freedom doesn't come from rejecting money or dreaming of its disappearance. It comes from understanding what money was built to do and what it was never meant to provide. Money can move value. It can store labor. It can coordinate enormous systems. But it cannot replace judgment, it cannot guarantee fairness, and it cannot protect those who confuse structure with security. From barter myths to bronze, from coins to digits, the pattern is consistent. Money didn't arise to make life easier. It arose to make power portable. And once power became portable, it reshaped everything it touched. The most dangerous belief isn't that money is corrupt. It's that money is neutral. History doesn't repeat, but the logic beneath it rarely changes. And once you see that logic clearly, you stop asking why the system behaves the way it does. You start asking a better question. Where do I stand inside it? If this changed how you see money, hit subscribe. History has the answers. I'll show you where to look.